and welcome to episode 2 of the European Nights Project Roundtable Discussion. Thank you for joining us. Today we have the founder and director, Gio Wolf, talking with former presidential candidate, EKP friend, and all-around good guy, John Nugent. Gio, go ahead and make the introduction.
Thank you very much, Doug, for that glorious introduction. I'm truly honored to be in such esteemed company today. First, I'd like to welcome our fine audience in the U.S., South Africa, Great Britain, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, Italy, Germany, and beyond. I feel deeply honored that all of you have decided to spend a couple of hours with us today, so thanks for that. Today, we have the honor and pleasure of having John Nugent on the program, on the Roundtable program. As I am certain most of your audience is aware, he is one of the most respected members of our community. I'm a former United States Marine, Georgetown University graduate and scholar, former U.S. presidential candidate, and future, most likely. And he's appeared on countless television programs, radio programs, and he's with us today, which is going to be a fantastic interview. You there, John?
Yes, thank you for that introduction, and it's my privilege to be on your show. I've heard so much about the European Nights Project. You have tremendous listenership, and I would like to greet follow your listeners all over the world. You're an exciting young man. You have a beautiful wife and little baby, and you represent a spiritual approach to saving our race and our people, and I'm completely supportive of your noble approach to taking the high road to saving the white race.
I really appreciate that. That's one of the nicest things I think I've ever heard. I really appreciate that. Thanks very much. And obviously, you've been doing this for a long time, and you've made so many inroads into this community, and you've made so many helped enact so many changes in the United States and international community. And it's a shame that the direction that our movement has headed has been the wrong direction. And I think one of your best qualities is your ability to adapt. And I think that's one thing we should talk about today. How your philosophy has adapted over the years, and how your ideology has changed.
Okay, well, thanks. Yes, I'm known for controversial new kinds of thinking, and we say in American English, thinking outside the box. Yeah. Because basically, the world has been taken over by the forces of darkness. They control the media, the political process, the economy, as we know, and thus they control the more primitive masses. Unless we awaken people in a new way, and unless, white people are only 8% of the planet. Here in America, the average white man is 42 years old, and so is the average white woman. So she's nearly at the end of her reproductive cycle, her ability to have more children. So the white race is dying out. If we don't get allies, good people of other races, we will lose because the other side is taking over the whole planet. We must join up with good people of all races, and they do exist, and we must even reject the really rotten people of our own race. And particularly in South Africa, you can see the betrayal of the good majority by a tiny evil majority of white people, white Afrikaners and British South Africans who worked with our enemies to bring us down. So white skin does not make a person noble, and it does not make a person Aryan. I mean, the word Aryan in Sanskrit means noble, heroic, self-sacrificing, humble, loving, giving of yourself. And there are people of other races too who are noble and self-sacrificing, and they know that they and we have the same international enemy. That is the Pharisees, the ones who tortured and murdered Jesus Christ, and they are still a major world power today. They are our one enemy, and all races must learn who their enemy is, and we must, as Gentiles, all unite together against them.
And in South Africa, you raise a good point. South Africa, it's a microcosm for this kind of global assault by this one group of individuals, or this one group against Western civilization, which we see. And I mean, I see South Africa as a microcosm for it, because if you look at the who's who, the names on the list of the original terrorists in the African National Congress, I mean, pretty much they read like the who's who of the folks that ran the Bush administration, that now run the Miliband administration in Britain, that also have their hands all over Obama's administration. And so when you look at these people, you can see this, whether they're liberal or conservative, the parallel, it's irrelevant. I mean, it's the same sort of people with the same sort of hatred towards Western civilization. I mean, one looks at someone like Nadine Gordimer, who won Nobel Prize. Her hatred was not against the white Afrikaner. Her hatred was against all of Western civilization. They see themselves as the enemy of our civilization. And without our civilization crumbling, they cannot rise to the top. And I don't agree that's the case. I think that you meet many folks, you meet many good people, like you said, in all races. And I think we can coexist with one another, but we need to stop fighting with each other. And the people that are dividing us are pitting us against one another. I mean, the type of people that run the ANC, that ran the ANC, they use the black man as a pawn, as a weapon against good people. And they're doing that in the United States. The average black person is a pawn being used against the white majority by an angry, hateful minority that sees the white man as a monster and as a devil, in spite of the fact that the white man has created the lands that these folks live in and the system that they exploit and benefit from. For some odd reason, they hate us. And I still don't understand why. Do you think it's all because of some kind of sick competitive nature, or is it something that's, well, will you tell me? What do you think?
Well, you know, every great leader who has ever tried to lift up the human race has found that the vast majority of people are sort of intellectually and morally sort of mediocre, a mixture of good and bad. Certainly in Adolf Hitler's very famous book, Mein Kampf, he talks about how with the masses, you have to keep repeating the same propaganda points very simply and over and over and over. You know, a lot of people don't want to read books. They don't want to think new thoughts. They're afraid of scary ideas, which would upset their thinking. Certainly in the Aryan religions of Vedanta, which is a form of Hinduism, we talk about the upper and the lower chakras. In other words, we have a soul, we have a spiritual body. It's inside our physical body. And the lower chakras are the animal side to us. The animal side, you look like a crocodile who just eat, you know, and he just wants to eat and have sex now and then. He doesn't think about poetry or God or a better world. And there is a
side of humanity which
yes.
These people actually exploit.
Yes,
what do you see through the media? Through the media, with enticing folks to use drugs, to pursue sex, pornography. If you look at who's behind pornography and all these sort of primal urges, they exploit these and then they use them against us. Instead of the folks that control our culture trying to steer us in the right direction, as you mentioned earlier, we're being deliberately steered in the wrong direction, which is obviously cultural Marxism. Cultural Marxism is the deliberate destruction of our culture by preying upon our basis level feelings, emotions, drives, and to turn us into horrible human beings that just want to kill each other and tear each other to pieces.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, basically, all of us, white people, black people, Chinese, Hispanics in Brazil and Latin America, all of us have a lower animal side, which can be sometimes short-sighted selfishness, and or the crazy idea that to be a coward is the smart thing to do. In reality, your country is taken over if we each individually choose to be a coward and say and do nothing. It's basically what we're doing when we listen to our lower chakras and keep our mouths shut as evil takes over. And to say, I had met one guy in a bar and he says, "I ain't no hero." Yeah, you call yourself a man and you're joking about how you're not a hero. Well, what happens when your women and children are raped or end up on drugs or end up on the street or end up as heroin addicts? There's nothing laughing about admitting you're a coward.
The people that are trying to destroy our societies are exploiting this unfortunate human tendency to run.
Every man from the human race, all of us in the human race, are both part of groups, but we also have an individualistic side. And if we adopt what the Pharisees want us to do, this attitude of every man for himself, and they run onto the football field, and as a team, and we play as individuals, this is how 1/4 of the human race is dominating the other 99.75%. They play as a team, and we act as individuals.
And that's why, the EKP, my organization has come out and said all along that, when we say, and we've said at the beginning of this broadcast, we will not talk about the 1% rule. And when I say that, I'm talking about this argument in the white community that someone who's got 10% Native American or 10% whatever, it doesn't matter, that somehow that makes them an inferior person. This has to go. I mean, we need to come together and find a solution. And infighting about who's white and who's not white and who's this, this is just playing to the hands of the enemy.
I'm going to say something controversial here for narrow-minded little people. It says, black people have more testosterone than white people, and Asians have the least, by the way. White people in the middle. I wish white people had more testosterone. I'd like some of that black gene. If you call a black man a nigger, he's going to haul up and sock you in the head, even if he's 99 years old. You call a white man in America a cracker, he's going to say, gee, what do I do now? There's good things about black people. There's good things about Asian people, Chinese, Japanese, how hardworking they are, work 7 days a week, 23 hours a day if they could. White people have idealism and creativity. Every race has good and bad points. The main thing is I want all Gentiles to unite. We must unite. I'd like to read something, if I may, Giacomo, because I care a great deal about South Africa.
Sure.
And this is from a book about the fall of the old South Africa, the downfall of the Afrikaners and the Boers, and the end of, when Nelson Mandela took over South Africa. Okay, this is a quote from a book in English. Okay, it's a few paragraphs here.
Go ahead.
It's about a General Meijering, Georg Meijering, an Afrikaner. He was the head of the South African Armed Forces. Okay, this is about a meeting a few months before the turnover to Mandela. Okay. They were met by General Meijering, an Air Force general and a general in military intelligence. The atmosphere was friendly. They were served with coffee and biscuits and treated hospitably. Ferdi Hartzenberg, who was a conservative, had to leave unexpectedly because something urgent came up, but the rest of them remained. This is all these like right-wing conservative Afrikaners, Boers, and so forth. Eventually, they got down to questions and answers. Willy Snyman opened by bluntly asking the general, this is General Georg Meijering, if he was prepared to serve under a communist president like Nelson Mandela. It was clear he was expecting a positive answer. General Meijering was furious. How dare you ask me a question like that, he responded. I am the commander of the SADF, of course, the South African Defense Forces, and take orders from the president of the day. So Snyman then asked him, what are you going to do as chief of the SADF? What are you going to do if we engage in armed resistance to the political process? So, of course, this meant to the black ANC takeover. I will shoot you, Meijering replied. Do you mean to tell me, General, that you will use Afrikaner soldiers against brother Afrikaners, against your own people? Yes, replied the general. The soldiers are already in place. Joseph Chiole, obviously in Black African, said Meijering did not say specifically which soldiers were in place. By this time, there was uproar in the room. Piet Uys recalls, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, UYS. Yeah. I'm pretty good at Afrikaans, but I don't speak it perfectly. Piet Uys recalls that someone demanded to know what units he would use against his fellow Afrikaners. I will first use my English citizen force regiments. And then, another asked, I will use my black soldiers.
Yeah.
Isn't that incredible?
Yeah, it is, yeah.
So this is a man with a white man with blue eyes.
Yeah, so, like you said earlier, when we discussed, the idealism that, runs through our veins sometimes can be counterproductive.
So he's going to obey, the law. He's going to obey orders and so forth. You see, no black man would ever be willing to do such a thing.
No.
White people are in some ways too civilized, too orderly, especially, the Afrikaners are a mixture of Dutch and German, a little bit of French Huguenot, and some other elements, a little bit of British intermixture too. But the Northern European people are so determined to be orderly and not to make a scene, not cause a scandal.
John, may I interrupt you for a second? You mentioned earlier in our discussion, possibly before we went onto the air, the Kennedys and why they were targeted.
In a nutshell, both the father of the Kennedy boys and the son, John Kennedy, were very much against the Pharisees. He was going to use his presidency to suddenly attack them, close the Federal Reserve Bank, which is the source of their money power. He was going to prevent Israel from getting nuclear weapons. And he was going to reach out and have peace with the Russians, the Soviets, and with the Chinese.
He spent a good deal of his, when he was a young man, he traveled around Nazi Germany, and he marveled at Hitler's.
Well, he had tremendous admiration for Hitler. In around 1996, his private diary as a young man, he had just left the U.S. Navy after World War II as a lieutenant, and he traveled around with the Secretary of Defense, James Forrestal, the future Secretary of Defense, who's then Admiral Forrestal. Here's a Navy lieutenant, Navy admiral, but the Kennedys were a famous family. People thought maybe someday John Kennedy would be president of the United States. His family was worth $1 billion, and all good-looking guys. And so this admiral and this lieutenant are traveling around Germany after the defeat, the death of Hitler. It's all bombed out. And in his private diary, John Kennedy wrote, Hitler was one of the greatest men who ever lived. And after the smoke has cleared away and the hatred has died down, people will realize what a significant man he was. And John Kennedy was secretly a huge admirer of Adolf Hitler. But the Jews understood that because not just in his diary, but openly, his father, Joseph Kennedy, had been pro-Hitler, pro-Germany, pro-white race, and was against Franklin Roosevelt and against the America getting involved in World War II on the British side.
As well also, they Henry Ford and so many other great American men of that period.
Also, they were, the Kennedys were Irish,
of course, yeah,
and they did not want to support Winston Churchill. No, they did not want to support the British Empire.
Well, the Anglo-American power structure, certainly.
Right. They during World War I, there was a famous song in Ireland. You had the Easter Uprising by the Irish against the British Empire in 1916, and many Irish were killed at that time. But there was a common and popular song in Ireland at that time. And one line of that song was, Ireland shall never be free until set free by Germany.
I think the Indians had the same sort of song when Subhas Bose traveled over to Berlin and joined forces and set up the Azad Hind or the Free India movement, because he believed that there was no way to free themselves with the empire as well until obviously allied themselves with Germany. That's something that a lot of people don't. I mean, everyone wants to say that Hitler was a racist. All this nonsense, but Hitler had a lot of allies in the non-white world.
Oh, well, yeah, I have 5 books about black Nazis and non-white National Socialists who fought for Germany, fought in the SS, fought in the German army and the German Luftwaffe.
Subhas Bose was based in Berlin and was married to a local girl who was the secretary in the Nazi party. So,
exactly.
It's just propaganda being propagated by the same folks that don't like us having this conversation.
Exactly. Well, the thing is, Hitler certainly believed that the white race was gifted and had given us Western civilization and technology, and the greatness of South Africa, how it was built up, and it was the richest country in Africa, not because it was full of oil and whatnot, but the hard work of its people. The white race has a lot to be proud of, but we must unite now with good people of all races against the one true enemies. And you can see here with this General Georg Meyring, he said, I will use Afrikaner troops to shoot down my brother Afrikaners so that Nelson Mandela can take over.
It's almost like that's a Hollywood script penned by Steven Spielberg.
Yeah, so the point is, we cannot possibly say white skin makes you good or black skin makes you bad. There was a great French nationalist named Marcel Jouandeau, and he wrote something very powerful about what he considered to be the only real issue facing the human race. I'll read a little bit of it just in French. I minored in French at Georgetown. C'est une question de temps, c'est une question de juifs ou pas. Pensez-vous défendre par tout moyen contre ceux qui ouvrent vos détours par le racisme exacerbé? I'll continue on in English. It is just a question of time and of the Jews or not. Remember to defend yourself by every means against those seeking to destroy you by their exacerbated racism and to live out their demoniacal dream of world domination. Especially do not forget this. Their power exists only through our own baseness, incompetence, and cowardice.
Which is exactly what we discussed
white
at the beginning of
man,
this
look
segment.
at yourself. And people say, well, the Pharisees have corrupted us. They've bribed us. They've blackmailed us. But if the white race were not corruptible, we could not have been corrupted. If we were so noble and perfect, white race good, black race bad, Jewish race bad, Chinese bad, it's ridiculous. There is a battle for the soul of every man and woman on this planet. We used to see a cartoon in America, like there's a little red devil on your one shoulder and a little angel on your other shoulder.
I remember that when I was a kid. It was Tom and Jerry cartoons.
Yeah, which one will you listen to? Because we're children of God, and so are black people, and so are others. The white race may be gifted, and it is. It's a wonderful race. But we can be dragged down. And what is happening to America now is we are like in the last days of the old Roman Empire. We're being destroyed morally from within. And it's possible that America won't last much longer. China is rising fast. India is rising fast. Other countries, Russia, Brazil. America may not exist that much longer. We are being taken over now by Mexicans and by Chinese. And, our media, everything is controlled by the Pharisees, the people who own Goldman Sachs. They are the ones that destroyed South Africa.
We're going to take a break now in this segment. We're going to come back with more of this same subject. So we'll take a break now, John, and we will come back in a few moments.
We're back with the EKP Roundtable. This is Doug Donovan, and we're joined again by director and founder Gio Wolf and John Nugent. In this segment, we'll be discussing South Africa, the rise of the African National Congress, and revealing the names and the actual agenda behind the black facade. Although there were changes that needed to be made to bring South Africa into the 21st century, the men and women responsible for the fall of the nationalist government had no intention of helping the black underclass. Like all Marxists, they wanted to destroy South African civilization at the expense of Western man and enrich themselves on the blood of the masses in the process. Gio, why don't you introduce our audience to the extent of your research on who really was responsible for the rise of the ANC and how eerily similar these people were to the radicals behind the Soviet Union?
We wrote an article, quite a popular article, a few weeks ago, on Jewish involvement in Nelson Mandela's African National Congress. Very few people outside of South Africa, and sadly, many young people in South Africa today, born just before the fall of apartheid, are aware of the fact that the majority of the people in the African National Congress, especially the terrorist wing of the ANC, the secret wing of the ANC, they weren't even black. Let me read off a couple of the names of the people in the organization. Many of you will be aware of some of the more well-known folks. Some of them you may not even be aware of. So here are some of the names: Joe Slovo, Harold Volpe, Ruth First, Albie Sacha, Ronald Siegel, Dennis Goldberg, Rusty Bernstein, Solly Sachs, Helen Zusman, Ray Alexander, Ronnie Castriels, Raymond Suttner, Ray Simons, Moishi Geller, who interestingly is actually the grandfather of American Zionist pundit Pamela Geller, Wolfie Kodesh, and of course also folks who were not in the political wing of the ANC but in the spiritual and cultural wing of the ANC, women like Nadine Gordimer. But most of these people were actually Jewish revolutionaries. One has to ask a question: why were so many of the people behind the African National Congress Jewish? Why weren't they all black? Nelson Mandela was the face of the party, and yes, he had a major involvement with the day-to-day goings-on of the party. However, the people behind, or as we would say, the brains of the operation, were typically Zionist Jews and, of course, Marxist Jews. So my question to John and for our audience is, why is this the case? And why were these Jewish people so bent on taking down apartheid when, in fact, since the fall of apartheid, Many innocent Jewish people have been victimized by the rape and the murder that's been inflicted upon white South Africans, Indian South Africans, Anglos, Dutch, Boer, Afrikaners, all different types of stuff, including mulattoes and blacks, have been subjected to just, abhorrent violence since the fall of the nationalist government. So my question, John, would be, why do you think that these people were behind it, and what's their motivation, and what drove them to taking down this, relatively stable government that saw a nation reach top 5 nations in the world in terms of per capita GDP, and now we're at a point where the country's, if someone like Malema comes to power, it will fall apart and there'll be famine. I mean, what's their motivation behind it? And how do South Africans actually? Why were they susceptible to this? I mean, what's in the white liberal that makes them susceptible to this sort of poison?
Well, thanks for having me again on your show.
No, it's great. I'm glad to have you on the segment. It's very.
Giacomo. I was very good friends with a soldier, a German, who had moved to California after World War II, became a very successful businessman. He had many German restaurants, and he was in manufacturing. His name was Hans Schmidt. He was quite well known in the United States. Among other things, he had many publications in English and in German. He spent 6 months in a German jail as a U.S. citizen for, quote, hate speech, unquote. He had been in the Waffen-SS. He fought in the famous Battle of the Bulge, which is a decisive battle in World War II against the Americans, and got along great with Americans after the war, even with veterans of the Battle of the Bulge. He had been in one of the most elite divisions of the elite Waffen-SS, called the Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler, the Adolf Hitler Guards Division, which was the personal, bodyguard division for Hitler, stationed in Berlin. So he was the elite of the elite of the elite of the elite. And Hans said to me, this is the thing about the Jews. Now, he admitted this to me, that I don't understand. Here in America, they're crushing white people. Now, the Jews are fabulously wealthy because they're Ashkenazi Eastern Jews. They're white themselves. They're not persecuted. They own the media. They own Wall Street and our financial system and our banks. They control our politicians. They're in no danger whatsoever. Why would they push their luck and provoke anti-Semitism when the Jews, America is like a paradise for the Jews? The same question could be asked about the Jews for South Africa. Under apartheid, the Jews lived great. I mean, the richest person in South Africa was Oppenheimer, of course, the Anglo-American, gold and so forth, diamonds. Yeah. The Boers were convinced by their version of Christianity called Calvinism, the Dutch Reformed Church, that, the Jews are God's chosen people, they're our allies, and the Jews don't want the ANC to take over.
Yeah, let me add real quick. Yeah. A lot of the Jews living in South Africa were refugees. So they weren't given homes after World War II. They were homeless, stateless people, and South Africa generously gave them a beautiful country to live in. So, I mean, the Jews owed them, in a way, as well. Yep. Nadine Gordimer's family were refugees. Joe Slovo's family were Lithuanian Jewish refugees. They left third world conditions where they were, they would claim they were persecuted, to come to a land that accepted them, as you said, because of the religious teaching of the Afrikaner Church, welcome them with open arms.
Well, I have a friend named Mark. He's a former policeman in the old South Africa, and he designed my website, johnnugent.com. And by the way, I have a new blog out right now. I've recycled an old blog, which is a very important blog dealing with the theme of war, life, death, the soul, what happens when we die, and the suffering, the mental suffering of South Africans who were very brave soldiers during what was called the Grensoorlog, which is the border war, which lasted for 25 years between 1966 and 1989, when partly in partnership with the Americans and fighting communism, the South African army very bravely went in and defeated various black communists and Cuban communists in Angola and Southwest Africa and so forth. And then they were ordered to retreat. And then later on, all of South Africa was given to Mandela. So, I mean, the shock of betrayal. And then why did all our white brothers die in this war? For what? And I'd like to go into this. But anyways, I have a blog up right now. It's johnnugent.com called, it's in English, God, Guns, Guts, and Glory, to an Afrikaner grieving over the betrayal of the border war veterans and the fallen. So I go into all these things. But anyways, this website was created by...
We'll put a link to that on our website also.
Great, it's up there right now. And my website was created by a British South African named Mark, a former police officer in the old apartheid days. And I asked him once, what's happening with these Jewish girls who walk down the street in Johannesburg? He says, oh, they're being raped too. He says, the blacks don't make any distinction. I mean, the blacks rape the black girls too. It's out of control. So I said to Mark, so, the little Jews, they're getting it in the neck too, so to speak. The little Jews are suffering. So what benefit is there for the little Jews? And I began to realize, I thought back to my conversation with Hans Schmidt, and he says, what is driving this Jewish agenda? The little Jews in the United States are also being raped and murdered by certain blacks, by certain Mexicans.
Who are being empowered by the Jews, the same Jews at the top.
By the top Jews.
The elitist, hypocritical, Marxist Jews.
They call them the big Jews, the little Jews and the big Jews. And
our beef is not with the little Jews. I hope our audience knows that as well. We're really only attacking the people who are endangering all of our lives, whether it's Gentile, Jew, black, green, white, doesn't matter.
Right. The psychopathic upper class of billionaires, Wall Street billionaires, and their secret agenda, which they don't tell the little Jews. No. And the little Jews suffer. The Germans have an expression regarding anti-Semitism. It says, the little ones get hanged, but the big ones get off. Yeah. Or in other words, let's say, for example, there were an uprising against, quote, the Jews in the United States. The Rothschilds and the Rockefellers and they would get in a private jet and they'd fly to the Bahamas. They'd fly to London. They'd fly somewhere. The little Jews would get it in the neck, but the big, rich, filthy rich Jews, they would fly off to the next country.
So what is their agenda? You're aware of Kevin MacDonald's book, Culture Critique, where he argues that it's always it's part of an evolutionary strategy. But if we're saying that they're, at the end of the day, it can result in anti-Semitism, where an entire population revolts against them, where people are getting killed, and then on a regular basis, the little Jews, as you said, are raped as well, killed, lose their homes, get killed in the streets. I mean, so what drives them? Is it only an evolutionary strategy, or something like inside their soul that wants them to just subvert the culture of the country they're in? Is there something like Saul Alinsky? What did he gain from doing what he did? What did they gain? Is it an evolutionary strategy always, or something like in their nature?
No, neither nor. I've read all three magnificent books by Kevin MacDonald when they came out in the 1990s. They're very good, but a big piece of the puzzle is missing. This is the real explanation. It's the one I've given, is that the top Jews have entered into a secret deal with this reptilian species. Now, there's an Oxford University graduate, and Oxford is one of the four greatest universities on the planet. There's Oxford, Cambridge, both in England, and you have Harvard and Yale, say, in the United States. They're certainly the four top universities, and the four most famous on the planet Earth. This graduate with a PhD from Oxford University named Joseph Farrell. He's an American from, Montana. And he has written many books about what's really going on. All his books have extensive footnotes. They're perfectly documented. He proves everything he says. And one of the things he says in his books called Genes, Giants, Monsters, and Men is that what Yahweh, the tribal god of the Jews, what he really is an extremely evil alien. And that the Jews are pawns, they're puppets being used as part of this species attempt to take over the planet Earth. The Earth is shared by many species. it breaks the rules for one species to try to take over the earth. And nobody wants a nuclear war. All these species have nuclear weapons, but it would destroy the earth. So it's a gradual, peaceful takeover of the earthlings, the humans on this planet. The little Jews don't understand, like the little people at the bottom of Freemasonry, or in America, the bottom of the Republican Party or the Democratic Party, or the different political parties in South Africa or in Germany or England. The little people don't understand how they're being used. And nobody has told them the real agenda.
Okay, well, let me ask you a question. Since obviously the Jews don't make up a large percentage of the population, and these elite Jews make up an even smaller percentage of the population.
Right,
so how can 0.00001% of the population in South Africa corrupt the remainder of the population and to fight against its own best interest? I mean, how does that happen? I mean, what made the Afrikaner, the white South Africans, susceptible to this propaganda that was disseminated by only certain elements of their media? What made them susceptible to it? Is there something in us that makes us susceptible to liberalism and to this sort of Marxist ideology? I mean, why would we want to destroy our own countries? And we can see what's happened to South Africa. I mean, and a lot of folks in South Africa must have known, dealing with these sort of people for as long as they had. They must have known this could happen. So what makes us susceptible? What makes us kind of sign our own death warrants?
Well, basically what Judaism is, this is a psychopathic mind cult. And it's based on the principles of, as I say, of psychopathology. I have a major essay. It needs to be put out in Afrikaans. It's in German, French, and in English. It's called Psychopaths in Power. About 12 years ago, a major psychologist from the University of California, Berkeley, which is one of the top scientific universities in the United States, out in California, published a book called The Sociopath, Psychopath, Next Door. And it talks about how some people are born wicked and born evil. This raises the whole question of why. I'll discuss that later on, why some people seem to be human devils and born evil, why they torture animals as children, why they set fires for the fun of it, why they deliberately wet their bed, urinate in their bed.
It's becoming more of a dominant trait, unfortunately, also.
Right. There's more and more human devils in our society. They exist in all races.
Of course.
There's this South African General Georg Meiring, who says he'll use Afrikaner soldiers to fire on the Afrikaner people if they resist.
Why don't you tell the audience about that in this segment as well, in case they missed that segment?
Okay, what I was saying, General Georg Meiring was the head of the South African Defense Forces, and at an important meeting with politicians and army officials, they said, "What will you do if the ANC wins the election and Mandela wants to be the president of South Africa, dismantle apartheid, and then carry out the communist agenda?" And he said, "Well, I am a soldier. I will obey the orders of the president of the day. Today it's F.W. de Klerk. Tomorrow it could be Mandela. I will obey orders." And he says, "But this will be the destruction of the Boer and Afrikaner people." And he says, "Will you use armed force?" And he says, "Yes, I will order my troops to shoot and kill anyone who resists the takeover." And he says, "You will use Afrikaners to kill Afrikaners?" He says, "Yes. And if they don't obey, I will use the English regiments. And if they don't obey, I will use the black regiments."
But remarkable. And
he's an Afrikaner himself.
It's remarkable. And politically, you said he was quite conservative.
Yeah, he's a right-wing conservative. Now, so here's the question. The question is, if you are trying to conquer a people, how do you do it if they're very powerful? You must corrupt them from within.
No,
first of all, what a psychopath does, he makes you feel sorry and feel guilty. You're not helping me enough. I am suffering, and you cause my suffering, and your heart is so evil and cruel and cold. This especially works on white people. Many white people have a kind heart. Christianity strengthens this tendency to feel compassion and
That's
love.
what I was alluding to earlier. The susceptibility of white people comes down to this, obviously, ethics, idealism, kindness to all, equality. I mean, these are obviously white traits. You won't find these in really any other people on the planet. And
Well,
because of this, the idea that we're going to do the right thing. Especially it's an Anglo-Saxon trait, especially. We'll do the right thing, even if it means it's going to result in our demise.
No, and I'm sorry I have to disagree with you. I've found compassion in people of other races.
No,
I think that the degree of compassion is very high in the white race, especially in the Northern European part of our race. And you can see that the Afrikaners, the Boers, are Dutch and German, basically. And they have a lot of compassion. And even Eugene Terreblanche down in South Africa, he always talked about my blacks, and my blacks are good, and they work for me, and it's like a family, until the night 2 of his black employees came and chopped him up with pangas.
The white liberal in South Africa is, obviously not very popular amongst white conservatives. But I always tell people that white liberals are oftentimes very idealistic and they mean well. And some say, oh no, they're destroying us. Yes, they might be helping to destroy the country, but oftentimes they actually believe they're doing it to help the country, in spite of the fact that they're going to be raped also. Sometimes, obviously, some of it is a pathology, like you said. Some of them have, been corrupted. But others are idealistic, and they believe they're actually genuinely helping the country and doing the right thing. Even within my own family, and you're aware that I have 2 different backgrounds in my family. I have a Mediterranean background, and I have an Anglo-Saxon background. And I obviously have a deep connection to both sides of my family, living in Europe now. And I can tell you that although both sides of my family are wonderful, and I spend time equally with them, and my Italian side of the family is probably probably warmer to me than my Anglo side. The one thing I notice about the Anglo side is they're always talking about ethics and what's right to do and how they approach this, and they're always very politically correct. And when I deal with my Italian side, they're the opposite. They just say what they feel. If they feels good for them, they're going to say it. They're going to do it. And you notice even within families, and in my family, it comes down to literally the 2 different cultures. The Anglo-Saxon culture, the way they are, it's very idealistic, and they see the world. Their Weltanschauung, their worldview is very different from the Mediterranean side, which see things that are a bit more primally. And I think that, obviously, a country like South Africa, if it was run by Chinese, for example, if the Chinese ran South Africa and they were in charge of the South African Nationalist Party in the 1980s, do you think apartheid would have been taken down if the Chinese were in charge?
No way.
Yeah, exactly.
So basically what I'm saying is because of the Pleiadian influence, and I believe that, as I've said in other radio interviews that you and I have done, I believe that we're not alone in the universe. I believe that the different human races all come from colonists to this planet. I believe it's totally scientifically proven. But these blonde, blue-eyed people really have a strong tendency towards extreme idealism. This is why Christianity, whether in good or bad versions of Christianity, the concept of universal love and responsibility and forgiveness, admitting your faults, confessing your sins, this resonates. What I'm saying basically is that white people are natural liberals, and we will not save the white race until we understand that. We can't change it. We have to work with it. And any religion or any culture based on hate, white people will reject it. It has to be based on love.
And isn't it ironic that the Marxists are able to say that whites are the most hateful race on the face of the earth?
They're not.
We believe
They're not at all.
Yeah, we believe that we're the most liberal, most kind-hearted, most tolerant people on the earth.
We are.
And it's because of this tolerance that we allow Marx to tell us how evil we are, and we accept it. Instead of saying, look, we outlawed slavery before any other people on the planet. We have given rights to people who have not earned those rights. We always try to do the right thing. But we accept these people in our midst, like Nadine Gordimer and Joe Slovo, telling us that we are evil, that we have white privilege, and we are hateful by nature. And it's the exact opposite. And it's because we are tolerant and idealistic that we accept this, and then we make changes that hurt us.
Yeah, well, we do, because psychopaths take advantage of altruists. The word altruism comes from the Latin word alter, like alternative, something else. It means to care about other people. And there's a very high percentage of altruism among white people. And you go to the most lily white parts of America, such as Minnesota, Wisconsin, Washington State, Oregon, full of Scandinavians, blonde hair and blue eyes. They're the most liberal. You go to areas which are heavily Italian or French Canadian and Mediterranean in Rhode Island, Connecticut, New Jersey, and you meet people there who are much more tough-minded. They don't want to hear your sob story. They don't want to hear your pity party. I can tell you this, that near where I live in Pennsylvania, there's a little town called New Kensington. People miss the Italian mafia because they say they kept the blacks under control. The blacks were afraid of the mafia. You could go to some blonde-haired, blue-eyed Scotch Irishman or German and say, oh, the poor blacks, the poor blacks. They say, oh, it's so true.
He'll eventually fall for it. He'll eventually fall for it.
But in Italian, the blacks were afraid of the Italians. I'm not saying all blacks are bad.
My own experience. In Sweden, I remember there was a case where this Muslim boy was abused by his family. So the state took the child and put him into housing while the family could sort themselves out. They were going to get the kid back. And during this period, that obviously the parents were fighting with the state to get the kid back. And they were angry that the child was where he was living in foster home, that in spite of the fact that the foster family were giving the child halal food, they were giving the child halal food on a plate that had served previously non-halal food.
Yeah.
So, and the Swedish government went out of their way to facilitate, while this child had been taken from his family because of their bad behavior, they went out of their way to see that child was given special plates that had never touched halal food. And in Italy, that would never take place. I mean, they would just wave their hands at you and say, are you out of your mind? You don't like it, go somewhere else. I mean, I was in a police station once in southern Italy, and there were Chinese people complaining in the back that they had to wait too long and that the paperwork was not, they couldn't understand the paperwork. And the policeman said right in front of me to them, he said, "Va via Cinesi," which means go away, Chinese people. And no one blinked. In England, if that happened, people would look and say, oh my God, how can you say that? That's wrong. And in Italy, it's like, go away, Chinese people, and no one even blinks. Because I was raised in a more Anglo-Saxon environment, I blinked. I looked at them like, oh my God, how can you say just go away, Chinese, in such an abrupt manner? Because I was raised in this tolerant environment as well. And, and that's obviously, it's a nice thing in some ways, but as you can see in South Africa, in the United States, it's resulting in some tragic circumstances.
Well, the word tolerant used to mean to put up with something that's evil. Tolerance was not originally a good word. It's not originally a good word at all. It means something evil is going on and you do nothing about it. Yes. The Pharisees have twisted so many words. The word tolerance is now a good word. The word discrimination, which used to be a good word, is now a bad word. And the word gay used to mean you're happy and joyful. Now it means you're a homosexual. You want to stick your penis up another man's smelly butthole. I mean, this is unbelievable how they twist words.
My mother used to say when we were little, she would say that I had she would say discerning or discriminating. And it was a positive word. I recall that even.
Absolutely. Discriminating tastes. Yeah, somebody who knows good wines, good cigars.
Exactly. And, but then obviously the word discrimination is something we don't agree with discriminating for the sake of it. But certainly one is allowed to discriminate if one thinks it's the best interest of their family or their country or their community. Mm-hmm. But we're not allowed to do that anymore either, are we? So back to the South Africans, you were mentioning how they were susceptible for a variety of different reasons.
Exactly. I believe that, look, this is how you take over a country. You take the naive and trusting people and you make them feel guilty so they'll do things for you. Now, another thing you do with people who are less trusting, such as your politicians and your generals, what you do there is you offer them bribes. Now, I know because, my fiancé and I, we took in an Afrikaner family for 4 months into our house. They had 4 children, 4 beautiful little blonde children. One girl, she was a Boer. And I learned a lot about South African history. P.W. Botha, one of the last presidents of white South Africa, he had a confrontation with F.W. de Klerk, and he said, I bet they offered you $250,000 and a Nobel Prize to turn our country over to the ANC. And F.W. de Klerk said, that's an outrageous accusation. And it says, how dare you say such a thing? And P.W. Botha said to him, I know they offered that to you because they offered it to me.
That's a very interesting story.
So basically, with the naive little Boers in South Africa and Afrikaners, they say, feel guilty, the poor blacks, feel guilty for injustice, and you're cold heart, and you're so cruel. and now you must make up for it and give them power. Prove you're not a racist. Prove there is no hatred in your heart, blah, blah, blah. Okay, that works with the naive little people. With the politicians and the military generals and whatnot, then you say, look, I'll make you rich if you betray your fatherland. Or the other thing they do, Giacomo, is this. And I was in Marine Corps intelligence. I know how Washington, D.C. works. They get what they call dirt files. They gather information on the personal and family scandals in your private life.
Of course, yeah.
They find out about sex, drugs, alcohol, not paying your taxes, other things which can destroy your career. One of the things they do is they get sex orgies going, and they come in with a video camera secretly, and they record a politician. Now, the politician may be drunk. They could put a chemical in his drink, and he is full of libido. He wants to have sex. He becomes a sex maniac. And now he has sex with a girl, but he doesn't know this girl is 16 years old. She looks 19, but she's really 16. Okay, so now that is called statutory rape, or even pedophilia, because technically it's a child.
And there were cases of this. There were cases of this in the nationalist government in South Africa as well.
Yes, so they get dirt files and they have blackmail. Now, if they end up, the worst case scenario is having sex with like a really young child, like 9 or 10 or 7 years old, 35-year-old, 45-year-old politician. Then they have a video. Okay, so like some kind of male sex, like fellatio or something. This stuff here, mouth, penis stuff. Okay, so they have a picture. You're completely drunk, or they put a chemical in your drink, and you're like insane. You don't even know what you're doing anymore. It's called a Mickey. It's a drug they put, a pill they put in your whiskey.
Of course.
And you're crazy after that. It's called a Mickey. I was in Marine Corps intelligence. I know about these things. Then they have a video. 2 days later, these agents come to your office and say, Mr. Prime Minister, we want to show you something. He says, I have a laptop here. I want to play a video for you. And there's a video of this Prime Minister having sex with a boy. And they say, now, from now on, you will obey us and do exactly what we tell you. Otherwise, we will show this to your wife and she will divorce you. We'll show this to your children. They will not visit you in prison. You will go into a prison as a pedophile, and there you will be raped by the other prisoners and probably killed someday. So you either obey us and do exactly what we tell you.
So did this happen in South Africa?
You have South Africa, America, Belgium, England, Ireland, Italy, Spain, everywhere. It's done everywhere. They make a video of these sex parties. So when people say, well, why did Mehring, I don't know whether Mehring was a pedophile or whether they offered him $20 million, but they got to him. He's not stupid. Georg Mehring was an Afrikaner. He was a right-wing conservative. He was a brave soldier. He was a good soldier. He did not want an ANC takeover, but still, he did what he did and he said what he said. I'll use Afrikaner troops and English troops and then even black troops to kill the Afrikaners if they resist the ANP takeover. So they got to him. That's a fact. Now, I can only speculate.
Sure, yeah.
Bribes or blackmail? One of the two. Certainly, he was not so naive after all these years fighting against the black communists in Angola and South Africa, SWAPO and so forth. He was not so naive as to imagine that the ANC South Africa would be a good place to live and for his white children and his white grandchildren to grow up in. I mean, even the wife of F.W. de Klerk was raped. Patton, Alan Patton wrote that book, Cry the Beloved Country, about how bad apartheid was and how bad white South Africa was. Well, his widow left and went to England because all her friends had been raped.
And what's most disgusting about this is, we recently wrote an article on Nadine Gordimer. A lot of our audience obviously knows Nadine Gordimer, Nobel Prize-winning poet, author, anti-apartheid activist, friend of Nelson Mandela, and all-around idiot. But
Nobel, of course, was a Swede. Of course, you know.
Yeah, of course.
Typical noble-minded, soft, idealistic,
Of course.
sweet. And
It's
he
been
felt
hijacked
guilty.
also by these same psychopaths.
Right. And he felt guilty because he created dynamite, which is used by the military to kill millions and millions of people. So out of guilt, he created the Peace Prize.
No, of course. So with Nadine Gordimer, we wrote an article on her. And Nadine Gordimer, basically, I saw a video of her. And I could tell in the video she was a hypocrite. Obviously, you know a little bit of her background. She's married to a Jewish guy who's a multimillionaire. He actually established the first Sotheby's in South Africa. So he wasn't exactly a volunteer in Soweto in the township. He was an art dealer and a jeweler, and I'm probably guessing a furrier somewhere along the way. But she stated for the record that her dream was that all white South Africans would eventually intermarry and create mixed children. That's what she stated with blacks. And let's say you're an idealist and you're not interested in racial preservation or whatever. You could say, okay, well, maybe she meant it. But we dug a little bit into her family background. She was raised a secular Jew, married twice, both times to Ashkenazi, white Eastern European Jews. Her children are both married to Jews. Her children left South Africa and went to the United States, where they went to top universities. Her son, Hugo, I think his name was, he's a filmmaker living in the wealthiest area of New York. Coming from New York, I remember reading it was somewhere in Westchester, and I recall it was within minutes of the Clinton household. Up in Chappaqua, I think that's like in Westchester, southern Westchester, where all the New York Ranger ice hockey players live, and all the film actors and Broadway folks live. So she basically takes her children out of South Africa, sends them to the best schools in the West. They live in the richest areas of New York. They all marry Jews, but yet for the South Africans, the people who live in poor communities, white, whatever, she wants them to live in dangerous environment. And when this BBC director asked her, well, I mean, what about the ANC and the fact that it's become corrupt and there's now been lots of rapes and crime? Do you feel as though maybe your activism was misguided slightly? Are I expected her to say, yes, there's some things about the ANC I don't appreciate, and yes, I feel it's tragic that people are being raped today. No, what she stated was, it was worth it because my friends, blacks, no longer have to carry passbooks with them. And he looked at her. He said, well, what about all the rapes and murders? I mean, do you not feel that might have been something that don't you have any opinion on those things? And do you not feel that those rapes and murders are obviously not what was ideal? I'm not really going to pass judgment on the situation, she said. She said, all that matters to me is that now people who mixed in my circles have the opportunity to travel around South Africa without using a passbook. For me, that's more important than every single rape and murder that's transpired since '94. And she said that because her kids are all in Westchester, New York, and she's living in a gated community.
That's fascinating information. Well, as I say, I've known many Afrikaners and also British South Africans, and they're telling me what the old anti-apartheid party of the South African Jews and what liberals was called the PFP, the Progressive Freedom Party.
Yeah, that's right.
And what all the hardcore Boers said, it really stands for Pact for Perth. Pact for Perth.
Or New York City.
To go to Perth, Australia.
Yeah, exactly.
Because it's a similar climate and speak English and whatnot. So many South Africans, I know this because I have important friends in Perth. It's full of white South Africans and it's full of South African Jews too. So that indeed they actually moved to Perth.
Yeah.
So they said, oh, the post-racial paradise under Mandela, but then just as the Boers warned, PFP stood for Pact for Perth, and they moved to Perth, Australia. They abandoned their country after they destroyed it.
And meanwhile, the poor folks that still live in the country have to now be subjected to
the little people. Yeah. This is why Hitler was so beloved in Germany, because he created a socialist workers' party with a red flag. I am here for the little people. The majority are the little people. They do all the hard work, the dirty work, the dangerous work, the vital work of cooking and cleaning and making our products and growing the food we need, for God's sake, and our water. It says, who cares about all these little people?
Which is true. And unlike the Marxist who exploits the little person, I mean, his ideology was slightly different. I recall there was an instance where there was a ship. He was launching a ship somewhere in, I don't know where it was. It might have been Kiel. I think it was in Kiel. And there were workers there who were planted there by the party, obviously. And then there were the top hats, the gentlemen, who were there who who financed the building of the boat. And Hitler said, well, what about the engineers? And they said, the engineers. He said, the engineers. And they looked around and said, oh, yeah, there are no engineers here. He said, well, the engineers designed those boats. The workers built those boats. The rich financed those boats. And the engineers designed those boats. We need all of them here. So I think that's the difference between the Marxists, the capitalists, and what a true socialist would want. He'd want, society to work all parts, all moving parts in the machine, working in conjunction with one another, and recognizing those parts are equally important. And I think that's what that's the distinction one needs to make between, Marxism and true socialism.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, listen. Let me ask you. What is our time right now? How long have we been speaking?
We have time still. We have time.
Okay. Good. Well, I'd like to talk about the border war in South Africa and what it showed me in terms of how I see the real problem. The real problem is that people are afraid to die. They know what they should do, but they're so afraid of death that they don't fight. Now, not long ago, we had a case where there was a Boer movement. Was the Boer some like defense movement, and many of these guys, after 10 years in prison, just got 25-year prison sentence. They've already been in prison for 10 years in jail. Finally, they got their sentence, 25 more years, many of them. I corresponded with one of them, I think his name was Hendrik Pretorius. So my question was, but I didn't put it to him, because I was in the Marine Corps. In the Marine Corps, you understand, as a soldier, you have to be willing to die and to kill. You have to kill the son of some other mother. It's somebody's brother, somebody's son, somebody's husband. You have to be willing to kill them. And they're willing to kill you, don't worry, when the war begins. So the question is, why did these guys, these Boers, I forget the name of the group now, but they just got 25 years. And it was shocking, 25 years. And it says, why did you surrender? You had all these guns. Now, in the 1980s, we had a group called The Order. I knew the leader a little bit, named Robert Matthews. There were like 49 of them. They all surrendered. They had shotguns, they had grenades, they had pistols, they had rifles. Why did they surrender? If you know you're going to get 25 or 50, one of them got 75 years in prison.
So why did they surrender?
Because they're afraid to die.
You think so?
You'd rather be alive as a slave in a prison than be dead forever. And what I'm saying is, for most people, Christianity, it doesn't really work. They don't really believe in God. They don't really believe in life after death. If you believe in life after death, and you're a soldier, or you're a revolutionary, and you're singing, the South African song like Della Re, Della Re, Della Re, and you think of all these military heroes, well, then be ready to follow them into death, because then you will go through the tunnel of light.
Yeah, of course. Angels
will greet you. You will live on, and your life will be judged, and God or his angels, and maybe even some of your relatives that died before you will greet you and say, what a brave and loving life you led. You died for your people, and you are welcome now to heaven. But people don't believe it. Now, there was an important documentary that came out about the border war, which I say was 1966 to 1989. And it shows the trauma of these guys. And unfortunately, it used to be on YouTube. It was in Afrikaans with English subtitles.
And you can read Afrikaans, am I correct? So the audience knows?
Yes, very well, because I'm fluent in German, and Afrikaans is like simple German or simple Dutch. So it's very easy for me to understand. I'll just say a little bit, an Afrikaner, but really he's a German. He lives in Germany now, but he was raised as an Afrikaner. His parents were German. And because he's a German citizen, he left South Africa because of the ANC and the rapes and everything. Now he lives in Germany, but he sent it to me. And he wrote to me, Afrikaner wat nou in Europa woont, het mij allang in hartservideo-orde verraad bij de beroemde 32e bataljon gestuurd. Ik bespreek dan de mislukking van de kerk in RSA en geloof in God te behouden. So he says, an Afrikaner who now lives in Europe sent me this long and painful video about the betrayal of the famous 32nd Battalion. He discusses the failure of the church in South Africa to maintain the real belief in God. And what you see in this video is these guys are devastated by thinking about the war was for nothing, and all my good friends were killed, and they died for nothing. Now, here's a quote from this video. It's a very touching video because these Afrikaner boys were very brave, and excellent fighting the black and the Cuban communists in Angola. They magnificent soldiers. I mean, the Boers are just a great nation and a courageous nation.
Arthur Conan Doyle said that the Boer was the most formidable soldier on the planet. That the British met their match, and it was
it was only the concentration and death camps for the Boer women and children that broke their spirit, because they didn't want to think anymore of their little children and their wives being starved to death. It was incredible brutality by Lord Kitchener. And then, of course, he died in World War I, so I'm glad he did. He had bad karma that he was
But we need to come together, though, today, Anglo-Dutch, Afrikaner, in South Africa.
All of us
including the Indians and the decent, non-black mulattoes and black people who are against this regime need to come together. And that's one thing I think that
all of us. We must have unity of all Gentiles. So anyways, in this video, at the 25th minute, in the 18th second, and it goes into the 28th minute in the 8th second there, they talk with one of these Afrikaners. Now he's 50 years old. He's talking about his feelings about the death that he saw. He said, he's speaking in Afrikaans. This is the subtitle in English. I had one big issue that I battled with. I feel guilty about my friends who were left behind, who were killed. I wonder why the good guys were killed, and some of us who didn't deserve it are alive today. I feel it's not fair. And then another Afrikaner comes on the camera, and he says this: many of our friends were killed there. When I face difficult situations, I always think back to those who had lost their lives there. They would have loved to be alive to face these situations. Now, I'm going to analyze what they said here, because what they said was atheistic. They said, some of us who didn't deserve it are alive today. But if you are really a Christian, if you really believe in Christianity, then dead people are alive. That they're with God and they're with Jesus and they're in heaven. They're not dead in heaven. They're alive in heaven. But he said, some of us who didn't deserve it are alive today. I feel it's not fair. He's implying, I believe they're dead forever. You have one life, and when it's over, that's it. And the other one said, they would have loved to be alive to face these situations. He's saying their soul is dead. Now, my father fought in the Korean War with the Marines. It was the first war the U.S. government did not let the American military win. And the North Korean communists, psychopaths, are still in power now. 50% of my father's officer class was killed or wounded. And my father said once to my mother, and she later said to me, that my father, and he was an elder in the Presbyterian Church, which is the Calvinist church, just like in South Africa or in Holland, the Netherlands, Calvinism. In America, it's called Presbyterian, or in Scotland, also a Calvinist country, also called Presbyterian. But it's all John Calvin teaching. My father was an elder in the Presbyterian church. But you know what he said to my mother? And she later revealed it to me. I stopped believing in God after Korea because the horrible death and atrocities he saw. He felt like there's no God. There's just evil and violence and brute force and money and power. That's all there is. It's a jungle. It's a jungle planet. So I'm saying, but if you believe this, if your religion does not prepare you to understand tragedy, then war will make you into an atheist. Or if your daughter is raped, or if your wife is raped, or if your best friend is raped, or if somebody who goes to church every Sunday is raped or murdered, then you have a crisis.
No, which is true. It happens all the time, obviously.
Yes. So therefore, regular Christianity is not preparing people for tragedy. And in the end, by these Boer boys who are now 50-year-old men saying, oh, my friends are not alive today, that proves they're an atheist. Of course they're alive today. They're living in another dimension where after we die, we go to other worlds. And we are judged, and we have more lives, and we learn, and we do other things in other worlds. That's what Christianity teaches, but they obviously don't believe it because they're grieving. I feel so guilty. Quote, I feel guilty about my friends were left behind. So they're functional atheists. And I am saying that many people who are Calvinists in South Africa or America or England or Germany, they don't really believe it, that there's life after death. And so this is where I segue into my other point. Is that the original, this is from my blog. It's up right now. Again, it's the blog, English, God, Guts, Guns, Guts, and Glory, to an Afrikaner grieving over the betrayal of the border war veterans and the fallen. And in this blog, there is this Louis Botma. He's an economist. He has a PhD, doctorate in economic science. And he is looking to one of his friends. This is a screenshot from the video. He's saying, there were pieces of his body dangling from the trees. So one of the Boer soldiers stepped on a landmine and it blew his body up into the trees. And arms and legs were hanging from the trees. So he still can't shake this memory. Now, if you're an atheist, how horrible. 1 minute you're alive, next minute you're just pieces of meat hanging on a tree. Okay. And then you feel, oh my God, that can't be a God because he was such a nice guy. He was fighting evil communists, and the evil communists killed the good man. So there's no God, there's just power. There's no God, there's no afterlife. Maybe I'm the next one to die. And then my arms and legs will be up in the tree. Yeah. So I'm going to lie, I'm going to steal, I'm going to get sex, I will cheat on my wife. I will do anything because I want to have a little bit of fun before I die, because when I die, I'll be dead forever. So this is a toxic, dangerous concept that can destroy a race and a nation because it makes you into a coward and a selfish coward. I want to grab some fun for me in my short little life.
Yeah, certainly. And I think that's one thing that I noticed when I read some of the memoirs of American soldiers during World War II, that they recognized in the Japanese that death did not faze them. They had they were going to fight to the end. It didn't matter. It was for honor, it was for country. And, those things sometimes can even be, for them, that was their religion, the honor in their blood and their soil and their country. And certainly, exactly. This strength of character can drive people forward, even when they see people's limbs being blown off. You're saying it's religion, obviously, to understand there is an afterlife, but also I think that in certain cases you can die for your country, even if we don't think there's an afterlife. It might be worth it for some people.
Well, it might be, but not for enough people. Not enough people.
In Japan, it seems to be, though.
No, but they're Buddhists. They believe in reincarnation.
They do, but you think that was what drove them forward?
Yes.
You do?
Of course. State Shintoism was a mixture of a kind of a Japanese nationalism and the Buddhist belief when you die, you reincarnate. You have your next life will be better because you died as a hero. When Julius Caesar wrote his book De Bello Gallico, which is on the Gallic War, it was how the Roman Empire, conquered Gaul, which is now the nation of France, and it was heavily Celtic country, a lot of people with red hair and blue eyes, and like Ireland, or Scotland, or parts of England, and whatnot. He said, the reason why the Celtic people, the Gallic people, fought so hard against us was they believe they have many lives and they are not afraid to die for the freedom of their country. If you know that your life goes on and that you will have a better life if you die as a hero on the battlefield for your nation, then you'll be eager to die in a brave way. And you will understand if you live as a coward and run off into the bushes while your brothers are fighting, and you hear the screams as your wife and your daughters are being raped because you ran up into the bushes and into the mountains as a coward. Oh, you may live longer, yes, but when you die, you will face God. And he will say, it is you, the old coward. And then you will face the judgment of God, who saw everything that happened. And all those young men who died defending their people have gone on to a glorious life. And those cowards will go to a horrific hell. Maybe they will be raped in their next life or in some hell on the other side. Every man who runs from the battle deserves the worst possible treatment. Now, the Vikings believed in reincarnation, and they were actually eager to die in battle. If you die in battle, then you were dying as a hero and courageous. But if you die as a coward, they actually believe your soul, the gods could decide to destroy your soul forever. And they would take away your intelligence and whatever talents and abilities you had. They would break your soul up and put the different pieces on a shelf, and they would make a new human from some of your parts. But your soul, as a coward, would be destroyed by the gods. And you would be dead forever then. The worst thing a man can do is die as a coward. And this is my religion.
I think that's universal in all cultures.
This is the religion of Adolf Hitler. This is the religion of the ancient Aryans of Greece and Rome, the Aryans of India, the Zoroastrians, of the Vikings and of the Celts and the ancient Germanic peoples. The true Aryan doctrine is you have many lives. There are many worlds. And sometimes we come back to this world. So, if you turn your country over to its enemies, then maybe God will send you right back to your country when it is under their control. And then you will find the South Africa you come back to is a hell, or the America is a hell, or the Germany is a hell, and you will come back to hell on earth. That would be fair.
And I think that's happening right now in all the countries you mentioned. Well,
Yes, yes. All these British and Americans who bombed Germany and helped the Pharisees to win. Really, it's the Pharisees who won World War II, not America, not England. This is now their children are hooked on drugs. Now their children listen to rap and gangster rap music. Now their children are fat at 12 years old. They're sickeningly fat and they have diabetes at 15. Now their children have sexually transmitted venereal diseases. Now their children are committing suicide at 24. Now their children have no jobs, while Mexicans and Chinese are taking American jobs or British jobs. The chickens come home to roost. The roost is, where chickens live. The chickens will come home at night. Karma will catch up with every one of us. So I have on my website, johnnugent.com, the massive proof for the reality of reincarnation, of having more than one life. Not always a life back on this earth, but usually, yes, usually humans come back to this earth. This explains also why, for example, a country like Germany has had the same personality and national character for 2,000 years. If you read the ancient Romans talking about the Germans, they're saying the same things as people say today about the Germans. They're very hardworking, they're brave, they're very blunt, they're very honest, they don't cheat on their wives, they're not obsessed with sex, they're very proud of their work, and the perfection of the details. They have a very warlike personality, rough-sounding language. Everything that Tacitus said about the Germans in the year 100 AD is still true 2,000 years later. And why? Because these souls keep coming back as Germans. They like Germany. They're used to being Germany. They're comfortable being Germans. They love Germany. They keep coming back as Germans.
Well, it's a very interesting concept. It's something I'm going to look into myself on your website.
I have a whole website. Is about that. The evidence of reincarnation. I have a funny little story because my first wife was Austrian, which is like German. My second wife was French, and French personality and whatnot. But so she was from the border area, Alsace, which is next to Germany.
I've been there. It's the nicest area of France.
Yeah, it's a mixed German-French area now. It goes back and forth, controlled by Germany, controlled by France. Now it's controlled again by France. But anyways, so...
It still retains its German flavor, though.
Yeah, it does. And it's very neat. It's the richest part of France, the most hardworking, best economy, least unemployment, least crime. Some of the German qualities are very good, of course. And many of the kings of France admit their favorite part of France was Alsace.
I always tell people the only place in France I open my eyes when I'm driving through France is Alsace.
Oh no, I think all of France is wonderful.
I'm not a big fan.
My last name is French, so I'm very. I was born on July 14th, which is Bastille Day, so it's a big part of my heritage. But
maybe that's the English in me.
Yeah, well, I know. Well, all the different white countries have these feuds going, but there was. I read, anyways, a story from 600 years ago of a German bishop was writing to the archbishop, and he was saying, we have a big problem here, because, our hardworking German boys on the weekend, they cross over a little bridge across this river here, and they go over to the French village on the other side. And there they drink wine and dance all night. And then on Monday morning, they're not able to do good work.
That's very funny.
So 600 years ago, the French personality was parties and having a good time. And the German personality was the meaning of life is to work.
No, it's true. And I think that's something we also need to be cognizant of when we decide our immigration policies, even within white countries themselves. And I do want to touch on that before we end this discussion.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of South Africans are aware, who listen to our program, are aware that we are pretty active in trying to facilitate their emigration into Britain for those who want to do so. And right now we have a bit of a problem in the UK because the English government, the British government, no longer controls its immigration policy. Under the European Union, Britain's required to allow Eastern European immigrants from countries of the EU expansion states, post-2004 expansion states, first access to Britain. So because of that, Britain is not able to take in culturally compatible and useful South African people. Last year, I had a chat with someone at the Home Office. 96% of white South African applicants were rejected access entry into Britain. 96%. And these are people who've had to prove that they have money in their bank accounts to live when they come to Britain, that they have a skill that can be used in Britain, they can get a proper job, and they have to be able to prove that obviously they can speak English. And still 96% of the people were not able to get into the country. And then you have to look at the fact that these South Africans who weren't able to get into Britain, they themselves are, living in situations that are dangerous for them. Whereas people from Eastern Europe come into Britain who are not culturally compatible with the country. The Poles are not culturally compatible with British culture, regardless of whether they have blonde hair and blue eyes, as I hear white nationalists tell me constantly. The Poles are not culturally compatible. They don't have any skills. The ones who are coming in as migrants, they're not required to have any money in their bank accounts. And they have access to benefits when they come to Britain, which means taxpayers pay for their lifestyles. Whereas the Afrikaner or the white or the Indian South African who wants to come to Britain to escape from a dangerous situation is unable to come to Britain regardless. And the only ones who can come are the ones you mentioned before, the PNPs, the ones who are kind of destined to live outside of South Africa, because of who they know, not what they're worth. And that's one of the reasons why we also fight so strongly against the European Union and Britain's losing their national sovereignty because of the fact that we can't even decide which immigrants come to the country. And as I have family in South Africa and I have a connection to the country, which I'll discuss more in other programs we do, it means a lot to me to try to enable the South Africans to come in. I recently had a conversation with a top UKIP politician, and he told me that one of the ramifications of being in the EU was actually that Britain losing its place in the Commonwealth. Britain no longer, although in spite of the fact that Britain, obviously the British Empire, is at the head of the table in the Commonwealth, Britain no longer does as much business with Commonwealth countries. It no longer accepts immigrants from Commonwealth countries in the number it used to. And so that's a huge problem, especially when it comes to South Africa, because South Africans who would love to come to Britain, and most British people would love to have them here, we cannot take them. Instead, we have to take Romanians, Bulgarians, and Poles who do not fit into the country. They're culturally incompatible. And I think that's very important in this discourse because of the fact that South Africans want to fight, those who do not want to stay and fight, who want to live on and live with their children in safer environments, they want to come to Britain. And that's why the EKP fights so strongly to allow the culturally compatible people of South Africa to come to Britain.
Yes, yes. Well, I mean, if we say we're for diversity, then we would want all the different white nations to maintain their identity. I don't want the French and the British to be mixed. I don't want the Germans and the Poles to mix. All the different white nations, all the black and Hispanic nations, the different. I don't want the Chinese and Japanese to mix.
They don't want to either.
They're it's just like I don't want to have one flavor of ice cream. I want to have chocolate, vanilla, and strawberry. As the French say, vive la différence. Long live the differences between us. It's the difference between men and women is so fascinating.
And for me, it's also maintaining the uniqueness of the individual cultures. I mean, right now, yes. Polish is within 3 years will be the second most spoken language in Britain. It will replace Welsh. I mean, one has to. How many thousands of years has Welsh been? Possibly the second most or the most spoken language in the British Isles. And now Welsh will be third, behind Polish. If anyone thinks that's right, then they need their head examined.
Yeah, exactly. So basically, what I believe, I call myself a social nationist. I believe God is the racist. God created different nations. Was God stupid to create different races? Was God stupid to create different nations?
Different cultures.
Why didn't he make just one big continent? I mean, supposedly there was a continent 100 million years ago called Gaia or Pangaea or something, but the continents have floated apart: North and South America, Australia, Africa, Europe, Asia, and so forth, that have floated out across the oceans. And then God has created diversity. So this is the divine will, that we cherish our differences, we respect each other, we visit each other as tourists. You can send young people to a university in another country to learn things, but you go back to your country with what you've learned. I had a professor at Georgetown University, an Austrian, and he said to me, 2 things happen when you live in another culture. And he says it's a great educational experience to live in another culture for 6 months, really live among the people. And he says, 1, you'll end up loving your own country even more, but you'll also see 100 things you want to change.
It's very intelligent, very astute. It's true.
Yeah.
I've lived in several different cultures, and I know you have as well. And it's true. It's certainly true. And you bring things back with you which will help better your country. But obviously, you don't want to bring back 6 million of the inhabitants of that country with you, though.
No. I want to visit a German Germany, an Italian Italy, an American America, an Australian Australia, a Nigerian Nigeria, and a Chinese China. I don't want one big mixed soup.
No, certainly. And, that doesn't mean that we don't want any immigrants coming from different countries, people who can contribute and can benefit our society more than we can benefit. They can benefit from us. They're very welcome. But when we're talking about migrants, I mean, the only people who benefit is back to what you said before. It's those super big elite 1%. I mean, they benefit from the Poles being able to work for £4 an hour when the Brit cannot afford to do that. So the people suffer. And once again, the big people, as you said earlier, they're the ones who benefit. It always comes back to this kind of the same exact discourse.
Exactly. I'd like to add, I'm not sure how much more time you wanted to speak.
We have a few more minutes.
Yeah. I'd like to take this.
Now I'll give you the floor, and you can end the discussion. It's been great having you on, and I'm hoping the listeners will tune in again, and we'll have you on again as well. And I'll leave it with you. You take the floor, and then we'll close it out.
Okay, great. Thank you. I'd like to emphasize that not only did our ancestors believe in the fact that we have more than one life, and that many of our lives we return to this earth because we love our friends, we love our family, we love our nation, we love our race, and to learn more moral lessons, to experience new adventures. Often we do come back to this earth. Occasionally we even change from being a man to a woman and back and forth. Because let's say a man was like a harsh husband. Maybe he needs to have a life as a woman, understand the dignity of cooking and cleaning and bearing children. Maybe a woman who has been critical of her husband needs to be a man and be a soldier or work in a factory, understand the harsh life that men lead. You can learn a lot more in each new life that you have. So, but beyond the fact that it makes sense as a loving way that God teaches us through new experiences, there's scientific proof. The University of Virginia, my younger daughter, Erica, who just got married, she married a PhD candidate at Johns Hopkins University, which is one of the top universities in the world. She's a very successful girl. She has a degree in nursing, and she also has a degree in art. She does mural painting, realistic mural painting, not modern art, but beautiful paintings of like underwater scenes and pastoral scenes. Anyway, I'm very proud of Erica. She graduated from the University of Virginia. Now, the University of Virginia Medical School has a whole segment dedicated to reincarnation studies, because the inventor of the photocopy machine in around 1965 set aside several $1 million in his will to fund studies. Is there anything scientific about reincarnation? Because the great American automaker Henry Ford and the great American general George Patton is really the only American general that the Germans really respected, not just for having a lot of tanks and troops, but for his genius as a general, was George Patton. both Henry Ford and George Patton believed strongly in reincarnation. And many other great Americans and other great figures throughout Western history have, as well as Chinese and Hindus in India and other people believe in reincarnation. So he said to Dr. Ian Stevenson, who was a Scotsman, a psychiatrist, who also studied at the top university in Canada, the McGill University in Montreal, he said, here's $2 million. Can you track down any scientific proof for reincarnation? Like, let's say, a child having exact memories of a previous life. Like he could name who his mother and father were in a previous life, or what kind of work he did as a young man, how he lived, the details of his death, what city he lived in and grew up in, what did his house look like, what were his hobbies, what were the names of his little brothers and sisters. Can you provide a way to prove any of these memories? Because some people have memories of previous lives or feelings about a previous life. Well, that's exactly what Dr. Ian Stevenson did at the University of Virginia. And they finally accumulated 2,500 carefully detailed cases of children who had specific memories of previous lives. Now, most of us don't. What all these children had in common is they died a traumatic death. Either they were murdered, or they died in a plane crash, or they were hit by a truck or a car, or they fell as young soldiers or Marines or Air Force men in a war. And they felt cheated because they had such a young, short life. And what is really spooky about these kids, some of them actually had like a birthmark on their skin from where the bullet hit their body, or where they were crushed by a truck or stabbed by a knife or some other thing that killed them. And some of them actually had nightmares in their next life. One of the most spectacular cases is of a young man in this life. His name is James Leininger, nice German name, from Iowa, in the middle of the United States. Family, just regular Christians, didn't believe in reincarnation, thought like it's a pagan, heathen, anti-Christian doctrine. Although all our white ancestors believed in reincarnation. And I believe that the early Christians also believed in reincarnation, but that's another topic. But at around the age of 2, he began showing an intense interest, 2-year-old boy, in fighter planes. And he began talking about the Corsair, which is an American fighter plane used heavily in both in World War II in the Pacific and in Europe. And later on, suddenly he began having nightmares and screaming and waking up, and his mother and dad would rush into his little bedroom, and there he was kicking up with his legs into the air, and his mom always called him little man. You know, sometimes Americans will do that. Hey there, little man, to their son. And she says, what's wrong? Why are you screaming? Why are you crying? And he says, little man can't get out. Little man can't kick the cockpit open. And they were like stunned. I mean, cockpit, what are you talking about? And he explained to them that his plane had been shot down and it had crashed into the water, and he couldn't, with his legs, the water was filling up in the cabin, and he couldn't kick the glass out to get out and escape, so he was drowning. And in fact, James Houston, Lieutenant James Houston, who had almost the same face as this boy, did drown. He was the only U.S. Navy pilot who was killed in the Battle of Iwo Jima. Now, what's cool about this for me is my dad, who was a sergeant in the United States Marine Corps, fought at the famous Battle of Iwo Jima. That was the battle where the Marines ran up the side of the mountain and they raised the American flag on Mount Suribachi. And there's a famous picture of the Marines lifting up this flagpole. Actually, it was a very heavy stretch of pipe, heavy lead pipe. That's why so many Marines were lifting it. It was like a 20-foot stretch of pipe. And they lifted up. They used that as a flagpole. It was quite heavy. And so they just wanted to smoothly lift it up. It wasn't a thin little piece of wood. It was a heavy pipe. That's why all those Marines were lifting it.
So can I ask you a question, a personal question? Do you believe that, you don't have to answer it, but do you believe that you're the reincarnation of anybody important, or you think that you yourself is just a, how would you answer that?
Yes, I do. I do, in fact. When
I read about this a bit on your website, so I'll be honest with you, but I don't recall exactly what it was. But I do remember you said you believe you reincarnated yourself.
Yes, I do. I believe I was a German. I believe I was an important German in my last life. I am only 1/16 German. I grew up in New England. All my parents were British ancestry, English and Scottish and whatnot, and Norman. Norman, Anglo-Norman.
Yeah.
From the age of 5 on, I felt this incredible fascination for Germany. And when visiting my grandparents' house, I found a framed little stamp. And the stamp was in a little picture frame, and it was a stamp of Adolf Hitler. And it was the 44-cent stamp. It was the standard stamp you stick on a letter to send it off. And it was just, I knew my mother hated Franklin Roosevelt. My grandmother hated Franklin Roosevelt. And she was pro-German. She had majored in German in college, in the elite Brown University in Providence, Rhode Island.
It's interestingly, real quick, my mother also majored in German at college.
Oh, wow.
That's right. And she actually studied at university. She actually studied in Bavaria, even though she was. So it's right. That's quite an interesting parallel.
Because she did.
I actually played your video in German to my mother, and she said you have a brilliant German accent. She told me.
Wow. I mean, I have it's eerie to Americans see me speaking in perfect German. It freaks them out.
Yeah, my mother too. People in Germany ask if she's from the other part of the country.
Yeah.
They obviously see that she's not from their part, and it doesn't sound like from her. But so they'll say to her, "Oh, because she studied in the south of Germany." So they'll ask her, "Oh, are you from Munich?" And she's like, "No, I'm English."
So what was striking is my dad was very strict. He'd been in the Marines in 2 wars. He killed a lot of men with his bare hands. Had been a Marine Corps. My dad retired from the Marines finally as a lieutenant colonel. So my dad was friends with 2 American presidents. He knew Henry Kissinger. My dad was a very important guy. And he was used to being obeyed. He had an insurance business with 70 employees. My dad was the boss. And he was also the boss in our family. Anyways, it came Sunday evening, and it was time to drive back to our house. My dad called up the stairs, "Come on, John, come on down." And he was used to the fact that I'd be reading a book or something. But I ignored my dad, which is like the death penalty to ignore my dad. And he came clomping up the stairs. "John, didn't you hear me? I said, come on down, let's get in the car. Your mother and your brother are down in the car, and we're waiting for you." And he saw I was staring at this Hitler stamp. And he grabbed it out of my hands, because I was reading books from the age of 1 on. And he said to me, "John, that was a very evil man. Now, go down and get in the car." And he gave me a little whap on the side of the head, because he's not used to me ever disobeying him. But I was hypnotized by this picture of Adolf Hitler. And I began learning German immediately at age 5. And by age 6, we flew to the deathbed of my grandmother. Her maiden name was Berlin. She had blonde hair and blue eyes, like me. And there was a German lady sitting in the plane next to me. And I start to speak in German to her, sweating blood, because German's a hard language to learn. And I had no help, but I was determined to learn German. I was determined to go to Germany someday. And when I went to Germany, I felt so wonderful. But when I went to Austria, I felt, I am home now.
Incredible.
I am in my home.
That's incredible. That's an incredible story. I mean, I have a similar story. It's I wouldn't say it's, I felt like I was reincarnated, but I felt this strange, like you did, some kind of pull towards, obviously, National Socialism. And it was interesting, when I went to India as a student university.
Wow.
Yeah, I studied colonial history at university. I was very interested in, British Empire and World War II. And I traveled to islands in the Indian Ocean called the Andaman Nicobar Islands. And I visited this jail of these Indian freedom fighters, and I noticed that quite a few of the names on there, the last name was Bose. And then I did a little reading about Subhas Bose, who was an Indian freedom fighter, and his travels to Germany, and how he lived in Berlin, and he was married to an Austrian woman, and he started the Free India movement that was it was part of the Reich. It was a division of the Reich. He had a radio program in Berlin in the 1930s. We hear how non-whites were mistreated, but he had his own radio program, which was discussing India's alliance with Germany. And I had this certain pull, and it was almost like something was pulling me to this path he took. So I actually followed his path, almost like on a pilgrimage. And there's one last path he took that I want to take, whereas after he left, he went from India to Germany on an Italian passport, which is quite remarkable. And then the Germans wanted to smuggle him out to Japan. So the Germans took him on a boat, in a submarine, and they brought him to the Indian Ocean, where he was transported over to the Japanese on another submarine in the middle of the Indian Ocean. I think somewhere off of Madagascar. And then I think he at that point went to Singapore. So, I kind of felt like I had some kind of connection to this spiritual journey this man took from this part of area northern India to Berlin, and then to the east, and then back to Japan. Before his death, he died in a plane crash in 1943 or 44. And I've always felt some connection. I don't know where the connection comes from. I have no idea. But when I went there, I just gravitated towards this individual. You've heard of Subhas Bose, correct?
Oh, of course.
Yeah. So
yeah, very much, and I have a strong connection to Savitri Devi too.
Oh, do you? Me too. That was one of the reasons I went to India. Actually, I went to follow her footsteps to Calcutta. That was
wow.
I read all her books, and that was one of the reasons I went there. Actually, so I didn't mention that. I guess she's relatively popular now, Savitri Devi. She's gaining popularity with even the new left and the occultist crowd. And it's nice. She has some interesting books, and she's a very intelligent woman.
She wanted to meet me, but unfortunately, before her one and only trip could take place to America, she went blind and she fell sick. But I wrote a book. I wrote an article called "Tell It to the Spartans," and she loved it, and she said she wanted to meet me. But then,
did you communicate with her via phone or via?
No. But the editor of a paper called White Power told me that she had loved my article, and she was planning to come to America. She really wanted to see America and take the measure of the land. But then, as I said, she was an older lady at that point, and she went blind, and then she fell ill, and she died. She wanted to meet me specifically and talk with me.
That's incredible.
Yeah. So it was a great honor for me that the great Savitri Devi wanted to meet me.
No, of course, yeah. And so, I didn't mention that when I discussed my kind of pilgrimage following Bose's footsteps. Obviously he had a connection to Devi. The Brahmin community of northern India still sees Hitler as an avatar, which is quite remarkable. I mean, there are homes in northern India, in Calcutta and Bengal in particular, that I have not seen them myself. But when I was in India, I spoke with some National Socialist Brahmins, and they told me that you would find old homes still in their little religious areas of their homes. They had their little idols, and they would actually have pictures of Adolf Hitler. And you can buy Hitler's pictures still at small little kiosks on the side of the road. This was 20 years ago when he told me this was the case. I don't know if that's still the case, but the man definitely lives on in that part of the world still.
Well, I think that I don't think he was a god. I think he was an advanced soul. I think he was an old soul. An old soul simply means you've had many human lives, and you've probably thought about and learned about. What happens between incarnations is we go through the tunnel of light, we're greeted, and then we are forced to watch a video of how our life affected other people. It's not a video of our life, it's how our life affected other people. And then everything is telepathic on the other side. You can't tell lies and people believe you. People could just read your thoughts and read your heart. So angels watch you watching this video of how you affected other people, the good, the bad, the selfish, the indifferent. And then how you react to this brutal video of your life determines, where you go after that. So Hitler did lose the war, although there's much more to the story than that. I absolutely believe that the Reich still exists in South America and in the Antarctic. I believe many of these UFO sightings are actually German UFOs. But that's a whole completely other and fascinating topic.
Oh, it is, and we can do a show on that at some point.
You should show on that. But the point is, if Hitler had gone into Russia to liberate the Russian people from communism, every family in Russia had lost somebody to these Bolshevik Pharisees. The horrific suffering of the 60 million white Christian Russians died under communism. He could have turned them into his allies. They were already, quote, anti-Semitic. The Russians had always been anti-Semitic. If he had gone in there and said, we are here to liberate you and to create a partnership between the great nations of Germany and Russia. We Germans with our organizational skills and you with your vast size and your raw materials and your courage and your heart. These two great nations together can win.
I don't know if Hitler had the respect for these people, though, enough to form this sort of alliance personally.
Well,
what I've read and all the information I've gathered over the years, I don't believe that he saw them as his. I mean, he could have possibly made a political alliance But in terms of some sort of spiritual alliance, I don't think he would. I don't think he would have wanted that.
Well,
Personally.
that's exactly right, because Hitler had a typical German view that the Slavs were, below the Germans in many areas. But again, this is a widespread belief that many Germans had, and
still
also
have.
Scandinavians and Brits. I mean, we have Polish jokes in America, and many Americans are afraid of the Russians. And there is anti-Slavic feeling, not just in Adolf Hitler, but in many other European peoples.
In Britain, especially.
Yes. So Hitler was a child of his times. He reflected the values he was raised with. Growing up as an Austrian, the Austrians had a feeling about the Slavic people because Vienna, the capital of Austria, then as now, has a lot of people of Czech and Slovak and other ancestries. And the German Austrians felt they were not as hardworking or as honest and so forth and so on. So there were these ethnic beliefs and stereotypes. So Hitler grew up with that. And after the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, many Russian aristocrats fled to Western Europe, Paris, London, Munich, Frankfurt, Berlin. Hitler knew some Russian aristocrats who had fled. And some of them had very negative opinions about the Russian people. I can tell you that Dostoevsky, the great Russian novelist, he was asked by somebody from Western Europe who was visiting, can you summarize the Russian people in one word? And Dostoevsky said, thieves. Yeah. Oh, and she was shocked to hear him say that, like a put down of his own nation. But that's what he said. Yeah. And I've met Russians who say to me, yes, there's a problem with alcoholism in our country and corruption. And some people are not hardworking. They admit it. Some of the Irish will say similar things.
Well, with the pan-Slavic movement now, I don't know if they're admitting it as much as they used to. I think now they seem to be quite prideful of their.
But every culture and every race has good and bad in it.
Oh, certainly.
But I believe if Hitler had reached out in a more universalistic definition of National Socialism, Himmler gave a speech after the Battle of Stalingrad. He said, there are many people who say we should be allied with the Russians, not conquering them. And he says we should create a National Socialist Russian Workers' Party. We should give up the dream of Lebensraum, or conquering agricultural land in the East so Germany can be self-sufficient in its food supplies. That was the dream in Mein Kampf. Hitler's the one that wrote it. And he says, but no, we're going to keep the course. We're here to conquer. We're here to take land from the Russians. We're not here to liberate. Germany's going to be the boss. And maybe some of the blonde Russian kids can be raised as Germans, but we're not going to mix. We're not going to mix. We're going to conquer them. In 1925, when Goebbels first heard about Adolf Hitler, he went to hear a Hitler speech, and he was mesmerized. Wow, what a leader. This guy's got the magic, and he's so sincere. You can feel his willpower. He's the guy I've been looking for. But then Hitler went on to talk about how Germany's destiny is to conquer Russia and get more farmland because we need to be self-sufficient. And the flatlands of the East is our destiny. And Goebbels was appalled when he heard that. Just almost got up and walked out of the speech. I thought he was the greatest thing since sliced bread. And then I realized he was going to conquer Russia. And he says, I think we should have an alliance with the Russian people against communism, against the Jews, his words, Goebbels' words, and against the Anglo-Saxon city of London, against Wall Street. And says, let's have a national socialism for all peoples. But Hitler convinced him, no, this is the right way to do it. But Goebbels was never completely sold.
No, of course. Hitler had an immense amount of respect for the Brits. I mean, he had an enormous amount of respect.
But in reality, the British Empire was completely controlled by the Pharisees of the city of London, the stock market billionaires. And America is not America. America is controlled by the Wall Street billionaires and trillionaires, the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds. So I don't want to see any people or race hating another people or another race. It says we must unite against the psychopathic bloodsuckers in our own peoples and the organizer of all the bloodsuckers, which is the Pharisee Jews.
Well, it's been a great discussion. It's been fantastic.
Thank you,
I've enjoyed it thoroughly, and hopefully we'll do this again soon. And you want any parting words for the audience?
Well, thank you very much.
How about say something in Afrikaner if you can?
Afrikaans. Ik groet mijn broers en zusters van het Afrikaner volk. je was mutig in de verleden. Je zal weer een groot volk weer. And I just said, I greet my brothers and sisters of the Afrikaner people. This is, you were once a brave people, and you should be a great nation again.
Beautiful words. Thank you for coming on the show, and we will speak soon.
Okay. Thank you very much, Giacomo. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining us at the EKP Roundtable. We'll be having more great guests soon to discuss topics that impact you. Be sure to check out our website at www.europeannightsproject.com. I'm looking forward to seeing you on our future episodes. Let us know what you want to find out more about at europeannightsproject.com. This is co-host Doug Donovan signing off with Liberty and Freedom. Good night.